What would you do to survive? I mean, what would you really do? Forget money, forget status, forget everything you think defines you. When you're stripped bare, with only your will between you and the end, what are you truly made of? The story you're about to hear isn't just about survival. It's about a decision so brutal, so unimaginable, that most of us can't even begin to comprehend it. This is the story of how a man had to destroy a part of himself, in order to live. This story begins in April of 2003. Blue John Canyon, Utah, is an adventurer's paradise, a stunning labyrinth of red rock, narrow slot canyons, and a desolate, breathtaking beauty. For some, the wilderness is a place to visit. For Aron Ralston, a 27-year-old engineer and seasoned mountaineer, it was home. For him, the silence of the canyons wasn't emptiness, it was a conversation. It was a place where he felt most alive, completely free. He thrived on the solitude, the challenge, the feeling of being a small part of something immense and ancient. But on this particular Saturday, his deep confidence would be his downfall. He made a critical mistake, the one rule every adventurer knows by heart. He did tell a single soul exactly where he was going. The day started perfectly. He biked 4 miles to the trailhead, the desert air crisp and cool. He then began his descent into the remote, winding canyons. As he navigated a particularly narrow slot, he used a large boulder, probably weighing over 800 pounds, as a handhold to lower himself down. For centuries, this boulder had been wedged in place, a silent monument of stone, but on this day, it shifted. In one heart-stopping fraction of a second, paradise became a prison. The boulder dislodged, falling with him down the narrow gap, crushing his right hand and forearm against the solid canyon wall. The silence of the canyon was shattered by a scream of pure agony and panic. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire shooting up his arm. But the real terror, the cold, creeping dread, came with the immediate realization he was pinned, trapped, alone, miles from any other living soul, and absolutely no one in the world knew where to even begin looking for him. The trap was set. The first few hours were a blur of adrenaline-fueled denial and forced optimism. Aron was an engineer, a problem solver by trade. His mind immediately went to work, treating this like a complex puzzle. He tried everything. He pushed against the boulder with all his might, his legs trembling with the effort. He used his cheap, multi-tool knife, little more than a toy, really to try and chip away at the rock, piece by tiny piece. He even rigged up a system of pulleys with his climbing ropes, desperately trying to leverage the stone giant. But the boulder wouldn't move, not a single millimeter. It was as if he was trying to push the canyon wall itself. The first day bled into the first night, and in the desert, the night is freezing. The cold seeped into his bones, a chilling companion to his throbbing pain. Shaking uncontrollably, he barely slept, replaying the accident over and over in his mind. The what-ifs were a form of torture all their own. His supplies were meager, packed for a short day trip, 2 burritos, a few candy bars, and less than a liter of water in his hydration pack. He began rationing immediately. Tiny sips of water, small deliberate bites of food. Every drop, every crumb was precious. The second day arrived, and with it, a crushing reality. No one was coming. There would be no search party cresting the hill. The optimism was gone, replaced by a grim determination. If he was going to get out of there, it had to be on his own. Thirst soon became his primary tormentor. The sun beat down, turning the canyon into an oven, and he could only watch as the water level in his pack dwindled. By the end of the third day, the last drop was gone. Time itself began to warp. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes, and hours blurred into an indistinguishable cycle of scorching sun and freezing darkness. Now, a new, more terrifying enemy emerged: severe dehydration. On the 4th day, without water, his body began to shut down. His tongue felt like sandpaper. His lips cracked and bled. A constant, dull ache spread through his muscles as his body began to consume itself to survive. A metallic taste, the taste of severe dehydration, filled his mouth. His mind began to play tricks on him. He started having vivid hallucinations, seeing himself at a party, laughing with friends, a cold glass of water in his hand, only to blink and find himself back in his stone prison. The psychological torture was becoming as unbearable as the physical pain. He started talking to himself just to hear the sound of a voice. He reviewed his life, his relationships, his regrets. It was a brutal, forced meditation at the edge of existence. Despair, true and absolute, finally set in. He pulled out his small video camera. Recording goodbye messages for his family was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Not fighting the rock, but saying goodbye. He tried to smile for the camera, to be strong for his parents one last time, even as his hope completely faded. He apologized for any pain he caused, for his recklessness. He told them he loved them, and that his life, despite its abrupt end, had been beautiful. He had accepted his fate. Using his dull knife, he carved his name, his birth date, and his presumed date of death into the canyon wall. He was giving up. It was on the 5th day, at the absolute rock bottom of despair, that a new idea began to form. A horrific, insane, and utterly brilliant idea. He looked at his cheap multi-tool. He had already tried in frustration to saw at his own skin, but the blade was too dull. It barely made a scratch. The problem wasn't the skin, he realized. It was the bones. This was his terrible epiphany. If he could somehow break the bones in his forearm, the radius and the ulnav, maybe, just maybe, the small, dull blade would be enough to cut through the muscle, the tendons, and the skin. For a moment, his rational mind rebelled. It was suicide. It was madness. But another, deeper voice, the voice of life itself, pushed back. It wasn't madness. It was the only sane option left. He had to choose between a certain death and a chance at life, no matter how gruesome. Using the full weight of his body, he threw himself against his trapped arm, creating a grotesque and painful leverage. He heard a sickening, dull crack echo in the silent canyon. The first bone had snapped. The pain was so intense, so blinding, that he almost passed out, but a surge of pure adrenaline kept him conscious. He did it again. Another crack. Now only flesh and blood held him to the rock. He had to become a surgeon with his own body as the patient and a cheap pocket knife as the scalpel. In his mind, he had to disconnect from the limb. It was no longer his arm. It was just the thing that was keeping him from his future, from his family. He knew he had to act fast. He fashioned a crude tourniquet from the tube of his hydration pack, cinching it tight around his upper arm. And then, with a level of focus and determination that bordered on madness, he began the procedure. For 1 solid hour, Aron Ralston cut through his own arm. The dull blade tore at his flesh rather than sliced it. He had to use the pliers on his multi-tool to twist and rip through the thicker tendons. It was a slow, agonizing, brutal act of self-preservation. Finally, with one last determined cut through the main nerve which sent a shock wave of pain through his entire body, he was free. But he wasn't safe. He was free from the rock, but he was bleeding profusely, severely dehydrated, and still more than 8 miles from his truck. His ordeal wasn't over. He still had to rappel down a 65-foot cliff face with only one arm, and then hike for hours under the scorching desert sun. He was a ghost of a man, running on fumes, driven by a single, powerful image, the faces of his family. It was then that a miracle happened. Stumbling through the desert, a ghostly figure covered in blood and dust, he saw them. A family of Dutch tourists. Imagine their shock, finding a one-armed man in the middle of nowhere, miraculously alive. They gave him water and immediately called for help. The first sip of water they gave him wasn't just hydrating, it was electric. It was the taste of life returning. And then, a new sound cut through the desert silence, a sound he hadn't heard in days. The rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades. It was the sound of the world rushing back to save him. 6 hours after freeing himself, Aron was in a rescue helicopter, flying towards a hospital. He had spent 127 hours in that trap. 5 days and 7 hours. Aron Ralston's story became a global symbol of the human will to live. It's a testament to the incredible power hidden within all of us, a strength we may never know we have until it's the only thing we have left. He forces us to ask ourselves, what lies dormant inside of us, and what are we capable of when we have nothing left to lose? In the end, Aron didn't lose an arm. He chose life.